All right, today we're in one of my favorite parts of the town. We're here on the DC side. The train's going by, the tennis courts are here, the recreation center is here. Lots of activity in this area. And one of the things I love about Takoma and Takoma Park is you might be walking down the street and you would never know it, but you might be walking past a famous author or journalist or executive or podcaster. There's actually a very famous podcaster who lives here, not just me. And one of the people who fits that description is Scott Horsley, our guest today. And Scott is the chief economics correspondent for NPR. He's been doing this work for several decades. And today we're going to talk about how that experience covering the economy, the Fed, interest rates, inflation, all that impacts his day-to-day as he walks around this area, which he's called home for almost 20 years. So he lives here on the DC side, kind of in this area. We're not just going to walk into this interview now. We talked on a really sunny, nice day, and he was working from home that day. He didn't have to cover the Supreme Court because the ruling didn't happen, but he was still dressed in his suit and tie, consummate professional. So we'll start the conversation there. We're going to talk a little bit about his work, but mostly just his love for this area. And appreciate Scott for jumping on with me. Thanks for taking the time away to do this. And I guess the ball broke our way.
We didn't get a decision that would have required me to work on that story today. So
yes.
got some time to talk to Takoma Park, which is great.
So here we are. We're on the DC side today. And this is a street I remember biking down in this area to situate us. We're near Coolidge High School. We're near the Takoma Rec Center in the Bryce Harper Field.
We're right across from what is now Bryce Harper baseball field. It was a Little League field when I first moved here. It became Bryce Harper about 5 minutes before he decamped to Philadelphia. But it's a great amenity. We've got tennis courts. We've got the swimming facility across the way here. This is a really lively spot. And when I first moved here, I didn't know, just how much activity would always be going on. But it's great. There's always kids playing baseball or soccer across the way. There's it used to be all the cab drivers had a regular Saturday soccer game just south of here.
Yeah.
There's an island soccer game just to the north, lots of activity. And one of the things coming up not too far from now is on the 4th of July, this field is like an informal do-it-yourself fireworks display. And people in the neighborhood, or maybe from not the neighborhood, but people from all over come and shoot off skyrockets here. It really rivals what you see on the mall, but you don't have to fight for a porta potty or, deal with the traffic or the crowds. I can sit here on my front porch and get a fantastic 4th of July display.
Yeah. And there's just something nice about this street. It doesn't feel like a busy street. It feels like people aren't driving by really fast right now, but it's nice and wide and there is a lot of activity, which there's something comforting about that, and lots of kids around, but it's just a good mix of, I just remember biking down this street and thinking, I want to live around here someday. And I kind of manifested that because I only live a few blocks down and we come here all the time.
It is, I think, one of the emergency routes or something. So it does always get plowed when we get snow, not always real quickly, but it's one of the first streets to get plowed. But there's not, as you say, there's not a lot of traffic. There's always plenty of on-street parking, except a handful of weekends a year when they have a big swim meet across the way. And that's the one time when it's hard to find a parking spot here because, again, people come from all over and park on the street. But otherwise, it's a real convenient area and, front porch entertainment all the time.
Do you feel a real difference between DC? Because you're walking back and forth between DC and Takoma Park, Maryland all the time, right? Like, do you feel a difference in the vibe over here?
Not a stark one, no. I mean, you cross Eastern Ave, which is the boundary line, and I feel like it's all one community. I tell people I live in Takoma, and sometimes I'll say on the DC side, but I go back and forth all the time. My dog goes back and forth. We're all welcome on the Maryland side as well, and vice versa. People from the Maryland side come over here to use the ball fields, and I go walk my dog and ride my bike up Sligo Creek Parkway on the Maryland side. So I will say it's interesting, there's been a lot of transit-oriented housing built in the time I've been here, which is great. We've got the Takoma Metro station, which is a terrific amenity. That was that was a very important reason why I moved to this neighborhood. And there's been a lot of housing built, and it's almost all been on the DC side. DC has been much friendlier to housing construction than Maryland has. But I don't feel a real difference when you go back and forth. I will say one difference is you can buy beer at the Safeway on the DC side, and you can't buy beer at the Giant on the Maryland side.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's one key difference.
Yeah. We talked about that housing difference with Matt Bormett from People's Book in our first episode. At the end, I asked him kind of my one challenging question that I ask, which is anything about your community you would improve. And he ran for council and fell a little bit short, but he talked about that stark difference over there and how multifamily hasn't really been built over there for decades. It's all kind of clustered in one area.
And I certainly understand why folks in Takoma Park, Maryland want to preserve that quality of life, but it's a quality of life that lots of other people would like to enjoy, I'm sure. And
yeah.
I think the development we've seen on the DC side has been well done and has not created an undue burden. It's taken advantage of the mass transit, and the construction process itself has been respectful to neighbors, and the new residents are welcome neighbors. And I don't think it's been a problem. Some of the projects have been controversial in scale and so forth, but I think in general it's been a net plus.
Yeah. Do you feel like when you walk around our area, you kind of see things through the prism of some of the reporting that you've done over the years and thinking about the economics behind things? Or?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I used to do my banking at the Bank of America branch in Takoma Park, Maryland, which is now turning into, I think, a distillery or something like that. But I remember when it closed down, and I'm like, oh, where am I going to go to the ATM now? Which, luckily I don't have to do as often as I used to, because I don't. But everything's more plastic and stuff. But I was like, I wonder what this is happening, and turned into a radio story, because turns out bank branches were closing all over the country. And
okay.
And so yeah, definitely you can see some economic trends in our own backyard that are often fodder for stories.
Yeah, yeah. Well, tell us, I guess you and I have a friendship going back.
The San Diego
almost
days.
20 years, actually, to when I was getting
You were
my
just
start.
a pup.
That's
yeah.
right. That's right. And Scott, actually, you helped me get an internship with NPR in DC. I think it was a quick cover letter, but that carried a lot of weight because you had already worked at NPR for some time. But I think you got a similar start in radio to what I did, which is working behind the scenes as a production assistant on Morning Edition and working the overnight shift. Is that true?
I started out as on the overnight shift on Morning Edition, and then decamped for a while to work in commercial radio, and then kind of got worked back into member stations. And you and I met when I was working for the member station in San Diego, and I was mostly a business reporter at that time, but I wrote an ill-considered email to the political desk with some suggestions on campaign coverage for the 2003-2004 presidential campaign. And be careful what you put in an email, because I said something like, somebody ought to check this out. And they said, yeah, why don't you check it out? And what followed a detour into political coverage, first just for about 18 months during that 03-04 campaign, and then I went back to the business desk in San Diego. But then they asked me to cover the 07-08 presidential campaign. And when that was over, of course, we were kind of moving into the great financial crisis, Great Recession, and they decided they wanted to have somebody with some business economic chops on the White House team. So they asked me to help cover the White House. At the time, I was covering John McCain's campaign. I was on the bus, and so they said, well, take a long weekend and go find a place to live in Washington. So I literally did a lot of searching online, but I literally spent one long Saturday with a real estate agent driving all around DC, and we must have looked at 25, 30 houses. And this was the last one we looked at. And I put an offer in the next day. So I was a realtor's dream. It was one day of looking, and we put in an offer the next day, and we closed about 10 days later.
No kidding.
And I had some colleagues who lived in Takoma Park, and I had sort of sounded them out on the neighborhood. But I really did not do a lot of due diligence. And I did kind of wonder, boy, did I just buy a pig in a poke? But it's turned out to be great. I've loved the neighborhood, and it's been a wonderful place to live. But I can't say I made a super thorough investigation. It was one of the most rushed housing decisions I think I've ever made.
Sometimes the biggest decisions in my life I have made more based on quick intuition than silly stuff that probably doesn't matter, but I spend a lot of time researching it.
Yeah. I mean,
but sometimes, buying a house or which neighborhood you live in, or even moving to a different place? Like, it's just kind of like
my criteria was it had to be on the Metro line because I was going to be working at the White House and it's hard to park down there. So I had to have Metro access. I had my dog Diego with me, so I needed at least a little bit of a yard. I wound up with a much bigger yard than I really wanted, which has been more maintenance than I wanted, although I've come to really enjoy it. And I was eager to have a front porch, although that was not a must-have, but I got a front porch, which was great. That's been a real plus. And it is kind of funny. There's sort of clusters of NPR reporters in different parts of the city and the suburbs, and you can kind of date when they moved here. There's a whole bunch of old timers who live west of Rock Creek Park because that's what an NPR salary would pay for at that time. And then around the time I moved here, an NPR salary would pay for a place in Takoma Park. And then people who joined 10 years after me, they live, maybe down in closer to Fort Totten or something like that.
Right.
But there's definitely sort of economic and cultural things that attract people to different neighborhoods. But for me, it was the Metro and the yard were the sort of the main things that brought me here. And I looked all over. I remember looking at some places on H Street, and at the time they said, well, we don't have a streetcar yet, but it's coming. Mm-hmm. And of course, it took years to arrive, and now it's come and gone. So I'm like, well, I'm glad I didn't.
It's not even there anymore.
They've ended the streetcar. Okay. So I'm like, I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah.
Bank it all on that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't know what you think of the other areas around the city, like, or could you see yourself living anywhere else? I love west of 16th Street by Rock Creek Park, but then it's also not walkable in a lot of ways. You can walk into the park, but it's not like walk to retail. There's just like always something missing, and I feel like this area does the best job checking the boxes for me.
It's a real nice mix, but I will say, like the commercial district on the Tacomas on the Maryland side, that has evolved enormously in the time that I've been here. When I first moved here, Mark's Kitchen was really there was Mark's Kitchen and the takeout pizza joint, and that was it. And the Ace Hardware wasn't there yet. Roscoe's was a distant dream, let alone Republic, which is now Motorcat.
Barbershop and the salon, and
all of that was not there. There were a lot of kind of funky shops, and it had a lot of character, but there was nothing you actually needed that you could buy in walking distance. And so that's turned around a lot. And I don't know if this is true, but the story I've heard is that it was difficult to get a liquor license in those days, and so it was difficult to make a profit as a restaurant owner. I think that eased up. And then we got Roscoe's and we got Republic. And now there's, now we go where Takoma Bevco is. That was like a black hole. There was a whole series of folks that tried to make a go of it there before Chris Brown and company took over and have really made that a success. And of course, now they've branched out and have other restaurants in the neighborhood. But that's been a great amenity. But we didn't have any of that when I first came. So that's been an enormous improvement in the time I've been here. The Ace Hardware is wonderful. It started out small and it's grown and grown. And it's so nice when you just need something. One of my colleagues and I used to have a kind of a game where we'd try to stump them. Go in there and ask for the little bracket that holds up a shelf on an IKEA bookshelf. And they'd say, oh, yeah, do you want the brass or the polished steel? I said, well, it doesn't matter. Once the shelf's on it, you can't see it anyway, but either one is fine. But they walk you right to the tray and pull it out. And it's so nice not to have to, drive and then search your way through the Home Depot or something to find that. So that's been a terrific amenity. People's Book's been great. WWOD's been terrific. And so lots of great things have come along. It just seems like
we're hanging on to something here that's special about living a life where you go out and get things in person and see people and interact.
Oh, sure.
As opposed to the new way where everything's optimized, everything's just delivered to you, or you're doing a self-checkout line, or things are locked up.
And, the farmer's market is great. I will say when I first moved here at Christmas time of 2008. I arrived, I think, on Christmas Eve, 2008. By the way, I don't know if you can hear the CSX train going by there, but that's parcel of having the Metro right here is we've got the train tracks go by. It's
kind of weird the first time you hear it in the middle of the night when you first move here and you think it's a UFO. That might have happened in our household.
But when I first moved here, it was wintertime, and I remember stumbling on the Sunday farmer's market in winter. And where I grew up in Colorado, we had a wonderful farmer's market, but it was just a seasonal thing. It was like maybe April through October. And then everybody packed up and hibernated for the winter. But here at Takoma Park, they pushed the farmer's market all winter long. And it was kind of sad that first December or January. They're like 3 root vegetables and a couple of jars of preserves. And I thought, why are they going through them? But of course, come spring, it's terrific. I'm still a little disappointed, during the pandemic and when they opened the streetery, they moved the farmer's market off of the main drag and it's a little bit more out of sight now. The folks who know where it is can find it, but it's not quite as visible as it used to be. Every Sunday you used to bump into people you knew and coworkers and friends at the farmer's market, so, and we still have that, but it's a little bit off the beaten path now.
Who are some of the friends and colleagues that you see around here?
Well, Audie Cornish, who used to be the All Things Considered host, but she before that she was a congressional reporter, and before that she was a national reporter. But she and I moved to D.C. right about the same time. And her husband Theo, when they first moved here, they lived just up the street, and then they moved kind of over by Flower Avenue, and then they've moved back closer now. They've got kids, so they've moved to be closer to their schools and stuff. But they're still they've always been in the same vicinity. Of course, some of my White House colleagues, other reporters who covered the White House for other publications are in the neighborhood. It was kind of funny. There's a family who moved here from San Diego, who I never knew in San Diego. I met them here, but they had a beagle who they named Horsley after me because I guess the beagle had kind of a hoarse-sounding bark, and so they named their beagle after me. And one day, some mutual friends pointed me out to them when I was walking my dog, and they said, "Hey, are you Scott Horsley? We got to introduce you to our beagle named Horsley." Horsley the beagle has gone to the big dog house in the sky, but they have another dog now who I often see out walking. And there are tons of people in the neighborhood I know. I'm really lucky. So I've been here 18 years now on this block, almost 18 years. It'll be 18 years this Christmas. And there's not been a tremendous amount of turnover, but there's been enough that now I'm kind of the old man on the block. My neighbors, Signe and Fredney, who live next door, they've been here longer than me, and Tyrone on the corner and Miss Childs. But pretty much everyone else has moved in in the time I've been here. So I've gotten to know all my neighbors on the block as people have come and gone. But there's tons of people in the surrounding area who I know only by, that's that's Shadow's mom, or
from the dog.
That's Buckley's dad. People who I know their dog and they know me by my dog.
Well, that's how we are with kids, right?
Sure.
We'll sometimes refer to someone as like, Julie, mother of so-and-so, which
right.
sounds kind of like Game of Thronesy.
Right, right.
So you mentioned that someone pointed you out to that couple with the Horsley dog. Yeah. Do you ever get recognized by your voice anywhere?
Occasionally, but very occasionally. It's pretty uncommon. I was standing at the Denver airport one time talking to my sister, and somebody turned around and said, "Are you Scott Horsley?" But it's pretty uncommon. You have to listen pretty carefully. And also, if someone is a regular radio listener, and then they see me at the grocery store or something, it's like out of context, so they don't necessarily put it together.
Right.
Also, my voice is not that distinctive, I don't think. It's
right.
But occasionally I do get recognized, but not too often.
Okay. All right.
Which is another nice thing about being in radio. Oh, of course, this is gonna ruin it now because I'm going to be on this world famous podcast.
So have they tried to get you to do more video stuff over time or social media stuff?
Yes, I was dragged kicking and screaming onto Twitter. Which not video, but just 140 character post. And I guess I'm one of the last people at NPR who's still on Twitter or X, but a lot of the audience has migrated to video platforms like YouTube and so forth. So we want to be wherever the audience is. And so, there is some pressure to do that. I'm sure I'll be dragged kicking and screaming but I came to really enjoy Twitter but before it all went down the tubes, and I probably will enjoy the video too once I get over the bugs. As you know, I worked at a member station in San Diego that was a dual licensee. It was both an FM radio station and a TV station, and we did some broadcast television when I was there. And I always said we made the most expensive radio in the market and the cheapest television, and it kind of showed. So I left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. But.
Yeah. When I look back at my career at NPR, I kind of look at like the golden age of the work that I was doing, and I enjoyed all of it, but I kind of see like the early 2010s, mid 2010s as like, it was just so fun. It was partly the stage of the career that I was in. It was partly the technology to me was kind of a sweet spot where we had access to all these cool tools and we could create really great audio storytelling and do all this cool stuff. But social media wasn't at a fever pitch yet. So you didn't feel like you needed to keep up. It played into NPR's strengths, what I thought, which was slow down, context, depth, cleverness, little kind of wink with stories instead of like, we got to be first. And that's a tough place to be, especially in radio where all you have is your voice and you really not have to know what you're talking about or else you sound silly if you're just first on the scene. And then I think it got harder for me in the late 2010s and late 2010s, I would say, where it became Twitter based, keeping up with the Joneses as far as breaking stuff fast. Do you look at, it's not the best way to look at your career. We all have to evolve, and I've evolved in my own ways. But was there a time when you were like, that was the sweet spot?
Sure. I think you put your finger on some of it. Some of it's just the stage of your career. It is new and it's fresh, and maybe you didn't have family responsibilities, so you could
pour myself into
work all hours and all kinds of stuff. But the joke at NPR is that the golden age of NPR was always 3 years before you got there. So whoever you are, whenever you arrived, it was they probably told Susan Stamberg, you should have been here 3 years ago. It was really great. Right. Nina Totenberg, same thing. But I've definitely enjoyed different times of it. The media landscape in general is changing a lot, has changed a lot, and there's a lot more competition for ears, which has in some ways been great for, there's a whole generation, people your age, give or take, a little older, a little younger, who got their chops at NPR just at a time when the rest of the world was discovering, there's a market for long-form audio programming of all kinds. And so, when I started out, nobody else was doing that. And NPR could kind of say to young producers, well, if you want to do this kind of work, we're kind of it. And then, the New York Times and the Washington Post and every newspaper and magazine decided, hey, we should have a podcast. And it created a great market for a lot of NPR producers to go off and work for other folks. The most successful New York Times podcast was produced by an NPR veteran, ditto Washington Post. And so those skills that people honed at NPR suddenly had a market value, which a much larger, much more competitive market, made it harder for NPR to keep talent, but it's been great for all those producers. But it also means that there's a lot more programs now competing for the audience's ear, and we no longer have a monopoly in your car or on your phone. There's lots of places to listen. And even though you maybe can listen at double speed or 1.5 speed, you can still only really digest 22 hours of podcast a day, and you got to sleep sometime. And so it's a challenging landscape. Makes, that challenge is good, makes everybody up their game a little bit, but it's definitely something we're all having to contend with. Yeah.
I think there's only so much real estate on your phone too for like the amount of podcasts that are in your queue.
Sure.
Really there's you can have 5 or 6 on your phone and that's about it.
And the Takoma Park podcast, I've got to bookmark that now and make time for that.
Yeah, of course. Good thing we don't publish that often. And it may or may not be there on Publish Day. So, okay. Tell me about, what else you like to do in the community, what spots you like to go to. We talked about some of them, but what does the loop look like with the dog?
Sure.
And are there other places that you would want to kind of shout out that are just special?
Well, obviously, so I'm about equidistant between Rock Creek Park and Sligo Creek Park. And so I take full advantage of both of those. I usually walk my dogs. Now I'm down to one dog now. I've had a whole series of dogs during the time I've lived here, but I usually take my dogs over to Rock Creek Park pretty much every weekend, unless we've had a ton of rain, in which case it gets too muddy. But summer, winter, fall, spring, we're over there in Rock Creek Park walking the dogs, and we have a sort of regular route that we go. It's kind of funny, when I had just barely adopted Ribsy back in 2019. Ribsy and his big sister Ellie I got in 2019, about maybe 6 months before the pandemic. They were pre-pandemic pups. My previous dogs had passed away, and so I got Ribsy and Ellie, and we were walking in Rock Creek Park, and Ribsy liked to chase the deer. And one time he couldn't find me. He went chasing after some deer and didn't find his way back to me. And I'm walking all around Rock Creek Park, calling out for him and everything. And my phone rings and someone says, "Are you missing a dog?" And I said, yeah. And they said, well, he's sitting on a porch. And I said, oh, where? And they told me the address, and it was my house. He had come all the way home, which is a little over a mile. And he knew the way. I was really impressed that he knew the way to come home. And like I say, I hadn't had him that long. So I was very pleased that he thought of this as the place he wanted to go to. But then I had to get Ellie and hustle back here. I called my neighbor. I said, could you go open the back gate and let Ribsy in the backyard so he doesn't get distracted and run off again? But since then, Ribsy lost his off-leash privileges then, because I didn't want to take a chance on him dashing across Piney Branch Road or 16th Street and getting hit by a car. And of course, that's also to comply with the law of the land over there. But he doesn't seem to mind. I thought he would feel really bummed that he couldn't chase after the deer, but he doesn't seem to miss it too much. And he seems to like knowing that he's not going to get lost again. My regular weekend bike ride, about 13 years ago, a group of us from NPR started doing RAGBRAI, which is this bike ride across Iowa every summer. Mm-hmm. And it's not a race. It's just a recreational ride, but it's about 400 or 500 miles. So you have to kind of toughen up your backside to sit on the saddle that long. And so I try to ride every weekend to kind of keep my backside calloused. I call it a PCMR, posterior callus maintenance ride. And my regular route is to ride over to Sligo Creek Parkway and then up to Wheaton to the ice arena and back. Mm-hmm. And then as we get closer to RAGBRAI, I stretch it out and do a little bit longer. But that's about a 15-mile round-trip bike ride. And again, that's a regular part of my routine, and it's beautiful. Both Rock Creek and Sligo Creek, gorgeous place to watch the seasons change. Spring is spectacular. Fall, I think, is a little bit better. Winter is sometimes kind of unpleasant on the bike, but not usually. There's usually only a couple of weekends when it's just too wet and icy to ride. Summer sucks, So
I think it's harder than winter.
Summer in DC is the worst. But I always say, in my ranking, the seasons are: fall is best, spring is second, winter's third, and summer's like 95th. It's way down.
I'm with you. So that's the ranking the season. How do you? My wife and I were talking about how we rank the days of the week. Which can be a tricky one. I mean, I think Tuesday is probably the worst. Monday is somehow not as bad as Tuesday. Sunday can be kind of bad too if you got the Sunday scaries.
Yeah,
so, I don't know.
I'm lucky. I enjoy my work enough that usually this Sundays I'm usually looking forward to the week ahead. Not always. Not if I have to get up at 4:45 to be on the morning drive. I might chomp at the bit a little bit to say, I wish I could stay up a little bit later. But
any stories that you're really thinking about a lot now, or thinking about doing kind of longer feature pieces about, or just stuff that's going on in the zeitgeist that you're interested in?
Sure. I mean, my remit is the macroeconomy, and it's a very interesting one right now where we've seen job growth really slow down a lot, but unemployment's still really low. So
stock market's going crazy.
The immigration crackdown, the demographics of the labor market are a big part of my beat. So those are some of the kind of big trends. And of course, cost of living is on everybody's mind these days. Hopefully we'll see some of the price hikes triggered by the war in Iran reversed in short order, but who knows?
Yeah. Any other places around here that don't get a ton of love or press, but that are spots you've come to like?
Well, so I talked about Rock Creek and Sligo Creek, but I also usually take Ribsy on a long walk on both Saturday and Sunday, not to Rock Creek Park, somewhere else, and that varies a lot. But we usually go over on the Maryland side and just kind of wander the streets over there, and sometimes on the DC side as well. And it's funny, even after 18 years, I still stumble on new things. We were walking last weekend, and we passed a house over on the Maryland side that had a statue from where the wild things are, like the wild rumpus. And I think it's been there probably a long time. It looked weathered. It looked like it had been there for a long time. I had never seen it. It was kind of an out of the way side street, but it was delightful to see that. And we just wander. I have a poster in my dining room. I got it when I first moved here. It says the colors of Takoma, and it's a bunch of pictures of some of the older houses in Takoma with the really bright paint colors. I think the Historical Association put it together or something. And then I just added a new poster from the most recent Porch Fest because it was a great poster. It was shows a dog sitting on a porch playing a fiddle, and it was sponsored by our low power radio station here, which is organized by a bunch of former NPR folks, Marika Partridge and Bob Boylan and folks like that. So I had called the station. I said, can I get one of those posters once Porch Fest was over with? And Olivia, who runs the station, was driving by while I was walking the dog, and she said, hey, I got a poster for you. So it was great. And I went and got the poster off her porch, of course, and then walked over to Ace Hardware and bought a piece of glass to frame it. And it was a very Takoma experience.
Yeah, that's great. Go over to see my guy Dillip at the picture frame store. Awesome. Scott, thanks for doing this.
My pleasure. This was a lot of fun.
Appreciate you.